Last but not least on the list, moving on to the most reliable BMW engine of all time, we have the BMW. Hey everyone, this is Zach with 8020 Media, here today with a video on the most reliable BMW engines of all time. BMW might not be really known for its reliability. Surely many are familiar with a lot of the various acronyms people refer to BMW as: big money waster, broke my wallet, bring many wrenches, all sorts of stuff like that. So clearly BMW doesn't always have the best reputation for reliability, and a lot of the times people may assume that they're just money pits and terribly unreliable, expensive vehicles to own. While that may be the case with some BMW engines, and they've certainly had some that have been less than reliable and less than desirable, as we talked about last week in the video that I filmed on some of the worst BMW engines of all time. However, BMW has built some really incredible and pretty reliable engines throughout their history. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and jump into that and discuss some of the most reliable BMW engines of all time. Starting the list backwards with number 5 here, we have the BMW N52 inline 6 engine. The BMW N52 earns its spot on this list mostly for its weird era that it came out in. The N52 is BMW's last naturally aspirated inline 6 engine, alongside the BMW N53, which was introduced in foreign markets but not here in the United States. But ultimately, this was BMW's last naturally aspirated inline 6 engine. It came out at the same time BMW had started changing their formula to what we see nowadays, with engines like the BMW N54 being turbocharged and direct injected. The N52 has a lot of the more modern technology of its era for the mid-2000s, but was still an older school engine in the sense that BMW hadn't yet converted with this engine to the whole turbocharged direct injected formula as they did with the BMW N54 at the same era. So ultimately, the time that the N52 came out was a time that BMW was struggling a little bit with reliability. The N52 was around at the same time as engines like, again, the BMW N54, the BMW N62, which was one of the engines that I talked about in the video on the worst BMW engines of all time, and the S65 and S85 V8 and V10 engines. So ultimately, again, the BMW N52 is making this list in large part for being one of the more reliable engines during this era at BMW. With that being said, the N52 still does suffer from a number of issues, one of the main ones being lifter tick. Now, lifter tick is more of an annoyance and not something that really causes any long-term reliability or longevity issues, so not a big deal there. Outside of that, the N52 does suffer from some other common BMW engine problems like oil leaks and cooling system issues. Valve cover gasket, oil pan gasket, oil filter housing gasket are all things to look out for there, as well as the electric water pump, which is known to fail. Outside of that, the Vano solenoids do go bad sometimes, mostly an age-related issue there. So ultimately, the N52 is number 5 on this list for good reason. It's certainly not BMW's most reliable engine. However, it was very reliable relative to other BMW engines that came out around the same time, and was still a reliable engine in general. One thing to keep in mind here is at this point, most N52 engines are going to be 13 to 15 plus years old, so there are going to be some natural age-related wear and tear issues that are popping up on the N52s nowadays. Moving on to number 4 on the list here, we have the BMW M54 engine. So the M54 was actually the predecessor to the BMW N52, and the M54 added a couple newer things compared to some previous inline 6s, like the M50 and the M52. However, despite some of the new technology and additional electrical features on the vehicle, the M54 was still a very reliable engine, really doesn't suffer from a whole lot of common issues, apart from some of the standard BMW stuff, especially considering the age of the M54s nowadays. We are talking about a roughly 20-year-old engine, or even 20 plus years old for some of the earlier M54 engines. So this engine is getting old. It is going to be prone to some kind of age-related wear and tear items, like any rubber-like materials. That stuff just tends to become brittle with age and begin cracking. So with that said, some common issues on the M54. The Vanos is one of the bigger issues. The crankcase ventilation, or CCV system, kind of two of the issues that have been a bit more prevalent on the M54. However, looking at the age-related things, oil leaks and any other rubber-like materials are just prone to degrading and wearing down with this kind of age and mileage on them. So the valve valve cover gasket, oil pan gasket, really any type of gaskets, O-ring, seals like that are fair game on an engine as old as the M54, and certainly some common problems to be on the lookout for if you are in the market for a BMW M54. Moving on to number 3 on the list here for the most reliable BMW engines of all time. Actually lumped 2 of them together here. We have the BMW B48 and BMW B58 engines. So the reason I decided to lump these together as one engine at spot number 3 here is the BMW B Series engine family is a modular engine family, which means the BMW B48 and B58 engines share much of their design in common and use a lot of the same parts. So these are very closely related engines, and both of them happen to also be extremely reliable engines. Definitely the most reliable BMW engine since 2010 plus, and debatably even one of the most reliable BMW engines dating back to the late 90s and early 2000s. One thing of note here is the B48 and B58 are newer engines, making their introduction predominantly in 2016. So with these engines being a little bit newer, there's still some unknown information in terms of how they hold up in the longer term. Once more and more of these engines start hitting that 10, 15 plus year old mark, it's probably likely we'll start to see a couple more age-related issues. But ultimately, the BMW B48, B58 are both extremely reliable engines. Toyota is even using both of these engines in their Supra. So in my opinion, that's certainly a testament to BMW and how far they've really come with reliability on these engines, especially looking at the modern turbocharged direct injected engines. Certainly no debate that the B48 and the B58 are BMW's most reliable modern engines. With all that said, of course, even reliable engines are still prone to their share of issues. Now, there's really nothing of note on the B48 or the B58 in terms of common problems that are truly severe or anything to be concerned of. A couple of the more common things that have popped up, some B-series engines have run into issues with coolant consumption, and now that some of them are getting a bit older, we've started to see a few more valve cover gasket leaks and age-related items that I mentioned a moment ago, as well as the Vanos solenoids. Vanos is something that many BMWs have had issues with, and on an engine like the B48 and the B58, it really just boils down to the Vanos solenoids, which aren't too expensive parts-wise or labor-wise to get those fixed, even though they are a little more complex to access on the B-series engine. But anyway, really with these engines so far, haven't really seen any notable common issues, apart from as they continue getting older, it's getting a little more common to see some of these basic wear and tear age-related items. So ultimately, B48, B58, both incredible engines, and really took a huge turn from some of BMW's struggles from the roughly mid-2000s up until the era of the B48 and B58. Moving on to number 2 on the list, we have the BMW M50 engine. So going a little bit older school with the M50 here, and really what it comes down to is just its simplicity. This is an incredibly simplistic engine, and one that just doesn't have a lot of modern technology and electronics, and so naturally that is going to make the M50 a very reliable engine. With the M50, it still did have some advancements for its era, specifically the TU variant or the technical update variant did introduce single Vanos to BMW inline-6 engines, and the M50 was also the first inline-6 engine from BMW where they had moved from single overhead cam to a double overhead cam setup. So definitely a little bit more quote-unquote modern technology there from the BMW M50 engine, but overall it really still is just an incredibly simplistic engine from top to bottom. It's easy to work on, really doesn't suffer from many common problems at all outside of age-related things. We are talking about a roughly 30-year-old engine here, so naturally it is going to have some problems with that kind of age. But if you were to be in the market for an M50 and did some of the basics, fixed up some of the older rubber components, seals, gaskets, O-rings, then the M50 is really a highly reliable engine that you really shouldn't expect to run into many severe issues with. Now, one thing to mention with the M50 is one of the weaker points of that engine, as with many other BMW engines, is the cooling system. So some cooling system failures from time to time were not uncommon to see, but ultimately outside of the cooling system issues, again, really just no design flaws or really anything wrong with the BMW M50 engine. Last but not least on the list, moving on to the most reliable BMW engine of all time, we have the BMW M30 inline-6 engine. So the M30 actually dates all the way back to 1968. It remained in production for nearly 30 years at BMW, so just that production run goes to show how successful this engine engine is, the fact BMW managed to keep an engine from 1968 all the way up until the late 1990s. Really just an incredible engine. And again, like I talked about with the M50, a lot of the success and excellent reliability of the M30 comes from its very simplistic old school design. Not a whole lot of technology or electronics on these M30 engines. And so that's a huge success in a lot of its reliability. It's just the simplicity of the engine. It's a single overhead cam design. It had forged rods, a forged crankshaft, as well as a cast iron engine block. So incredibly strong for what it was, also relatively low compression ratio. So if you're looking for an engine swap, the M30 and specifically the M30B35 is an excellent engine. They're incredibly strong. These engines can handle boost pretty well and can make some pretty serious power on the stock block and internals. And so really looking at strength, the M30 is a great engine. It can make a ton of power. Now again, this is an old engine, so normal wear and tear items are going to be some common things that pop up, especially with the age of these engines. But ultimately, a little extra TLC on these older BMW engines like the M30, get them fixed up, touched up a little bit, and they can be incredibly reliable engines that really don't suffer from any problems at all. So ultimately, those are the reasons that the M30 makes the list at #1 for the most reliable BMW engines of all time. In summary, looking back at this list, there are definitely some engines that could be placed in and slotted into some different areas. It can always be hard to come up with the 5 most reliable BMW engines because all engines do suffer from some common issues, and a lot of the times older school engines are going to be more reliable, but that might not always be the case in the modern days where you're getting something that's so old and is going to need that extra attention, love, and care. Anyway, guys, that wraps up our video for today. If you appreciated the content, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out the description below for more. Thanks, everyone.